The mental health of children in England is that in some parts of the country, young people can barely expect to get any help unless they have already tried to take their own lives. The report also has surprising figures about the rising demand for services. We'll talk about why this is in a moment, but first this report from Laura Kunzberg.
What is happening in this generation's lives? A rise in self-harm, evidence of more distress, more referrals to services that aren't up to scratch. Why?
People don't realise how much young people struggle.
Everyone says, oh, I want that body, I want that face, and you know, we all say to each other, oh, don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do.
The major one is cyberbullying, because no one takes it as serious as other bullying.
My best friend, in fact, she suffered with severe depression and she was an alcoholic as well.
And MPs believe we're badly letting those young people down. It's difficult to read this report without being alarmed. The message contained in it is painfully clear. There are more young people who need our help, and it's harder now for them to find. And if they don't get access to the treatment they require, things can go badly wrong.
Interventions that can happen, you know, before problems become serious have been so devastatingly cut. And if you don't have the sort of help that young people need and children need when they're beginning to experience problems, when things are beginning to emerge, then 9 times out of 10 it escalates. And as it escalates, so they become more entrenched and it becomes more difficult for them to then come out of it as well. So we are inadvertently investing in young people becoming iller.
Campaigners believe that makes the service a mess. There are longer waits for treatment in a system MPs say has deeply ingrained problems. A shortage of cash is, from this report, a big part of the problem. But there's also a sense that children sometimes lose out because it's not clear who's responsible for helping them. There's a sense because of bad communication and coordination, professionals sometimes don't know what's going on. The minister in charge freely admits it's an outrage.
It is a broken system. There's some great professionals working in it, but they are constantly let down by the system, and youngsters and children are let down as well, and that has to change.
You're part of a government that has presided over cuts to local authorities that are a big part of the problem. This report shows that page after page after page.
There is no inevitability for local authorities to cut funding for children's mental health services. Indeed, many have chosen to do the right thing and increased funding. We've set the standard that we've legislated for equality. The sadness is that across the system, mental health has lost out.
The messages in this report have been conveyed many times. There will be parents of children with problems like this, professionals who work in this sector, young people themselves listening to you, thinking the organisation is a mess, there isn't nearly enough money, why should anything change now?
If we can produce a report from this task force that we've established next spring, which paints a picture of a modern service.
But that's a task force you've introduced that will report next spring. Right now, there are services mentioned in this report who turn away children unless they have already tried to take their own life.
Yes, so we've already this year got extra money. I fought for extra money and I secured it. So £7 million extra.
£7 million.
Is going into ensuring that there are 50 more beds across the country for acute services, intensive care as it were. And already we've seen that with much better case management, there are far more beds available.
Dee Dee Phillips knows better than anyone. She first felt depressed at 13. Now in her early 20s, not long ago, she hit a low.
I took an overdose and I got taken to hospital in an ambulance, and then I got put on a drip. And that was the lowest point of my whole life so far. I think a lot of people see it as like a phase, you know, teenage phase, growing up and things like that. But I think it's better to kind of prevent it and treat it early on, because if you just let it continue, it's just going to go on to adult life and it's just going to get worse.
Do you think that's what's happened to you?
Yeah, 100%.
How do you feel about that?
Obviously I'm really upset that I can't change what's already happened. So for now what I can do is kind of concentrate on like the here and now and what's going on with me now, rather than dwell on what happened when I was younger, because that's all I can do, can't change it.
The intent's there, but whether politicians do change things for this generation isn't clear. The vows have been made so many times before, and right now, childhood is a promise society doesn't always keep.
Laura Kunsberg there. Well, with me to talk about what's causing the rise in problems for young people, Charles Walker, MP, Conservative MP, who's campaigned for improved mental health provision for 10 years and has talked of his own problems with OCD, and Professor Tanya Byron, clinical psychologist and Times columnist. We're in a place, aren't we, where it's almost becoming dinner party conversation, the frequency with which people encounter relatives or friends who are having difficulties with a troubled teenager. Tanya Byron, does that report from the MPs match your own experience?
Completely. I mean, the report said, you know, I mean, it's a shocking report, but it's accurate. It's completely accurate. It's shocking that, you know, in the 21st century, we are looking at children who are being turned away for treatment until they become so chronic in their own illness. And I see that in my own clinics. I have colleagues. We have children, 236 children last year, held under a Section 136, held in police cells because there were no places of safety for them. These are children who are mentally incredibly unwell. And then put in beds often 200, 300 miles away from their families. It's shocking what we're seeing.
Have you got a theory as to what is going on, as to why the referrals are rising, why the demand for services is rising? Is it just a reporting and recognition thing, that we are better at spotting it now than we used to be?
We are better at spotting it, and young people, we have a very emotionally articulate generation, they're better at talking about it. But one of the other things that the report has highlighted, which again is absolutely horrendous, is that we have no real stats. The last time the ONS had any stats that we could use to really know what the issues were, the prevalence in terms of rates of presentation of difficulties, rates of referral, was 2004. So that's 10 years ago, 10 years since we have any reliable statistics. And one of the recommendations from the report is that these stats need to be looked at year upon year. So you've got commissioning groups, commissioning services, and having no reliable data.
And if we don't have data, no one takes it seriously or bothers to think about it. Charles Walker, you had your own problems. Now, was that as a teenager?
When I was 13, I had OCD and continued to have OCD, but that's when it sort of first visited me and never left.
And were you a case that was recognised at the time? Would you have
been
referred? So you might be one of these people who you would be now, perhaps.
I was going mad quietly and slowly. But I'm sure now we're much more comfortable talking about it. Young people are more comfortable talking about mental health. I'm sure things are being reported in a way that they weren't reported, say, 30 years ago, which is a good thing. But now we've got to make sure the services are in place to support young people.
Well, before we finish on the whys it is rising, it's not all down to reporting, is it? Self-harm, for example, is up, anorexia is up. All sorts of conditions do seem to be more common.
I mean, I think young people live in an incredibly challenging world now. We expect them to grow up much more quickly. They're sort of the units of marketing. They're targeted with all these marketing messages. I think it's really challenging being a child at the moment. And I'm sure, and I'm not an expert like Tanya, but I'm sure that has something to do with the levels of self-harm and upset and mental ill health we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, I think I'm absolutely right. I mean, we can also diagnose, more diagnostic criteria are growing. But, you know, we are seeing children being raised in a risk-averse society. Developmental kind of imperatives like freedom, particularly outdoor freedom, play, those sorts of things are much more curtailed. An education system that's very narrowly built around targets and testing, real pressure on academic success, fear of failure in a lot of young people, causing quite a significant increase in anxiety disorders.
So a lot going on that reflects modern society. I wonder whether this is a thing that lends itself to political solutions. I mean, at least in the terms of the prevention or the reduction in cause, Charles.
Well, politicians are elected to make a difference. I don't think we could subcontract this to NHS England. The thing I'm really attracted to is what's going on in Wales, where there are mental health counsellors in both primary and secondary schools. I think that is a really, really interesting development, because that mental health counsellor can not just deal with the young person, but can also bring in other agencies to support that individual and their families, because normally, well, often there are family issues that need to be dealt with as well.
And getting in early saves money, it saves distress, is just basically, it just seems a no-brainer, doesn't it, Tony?
It's a complete no-brainer. Early intervention and prevention, the report highlighted, is where there has to be significant investment. And, you know, the report also highlighted that a number of local authorities didn't see the business case for early intervention and prevention, which is extremely worrying. 50% of all adult mental health problems show themselves by the age of 14, 75% excluding dementia by the early 20s. So for every £1 we would spend on a child, an adolescent with mental health issues, it would be the equivalent of £84 if that became a chronic mental health condition.
What can parents do? I mean, just standing back from the state picking up distressed individuals and helping them, what can parents do?
Well, I work with many families and parents who are literally battling, and again, this was a word used in the report, to get their children into treatment services, to try and get recognition for their child's difficulty. But referral thresholds are rising, waiting lists are growing. And so for parents, there's a huge amount of desperation and despair. What can they do? They can...
Well, prevention as well as seeking services. I'm wondering if there's something that parents should be asking themselves they can do to help them.
Well, it's about growing emotional resilience in children. It's about having the conversations. It's about knowing your child and being able to understand, you know, what's going on for them. It's about working with schools who often spot these problems very early, and they themselves have real problems then getting children into CAM services.
It's such a big subject, so little time.
But we wouldn't have been having this discussion 5 or 10 years ago, nor would have this report by the Select Committee been commissioned. So that is progress.
There's Charles Walker, Tanya Byron, thanks both.
Thank you.
Right, those American election results now. The story is